Today, what are the 4 great discoveries of modern science that prove God exists? The first great discovery of modern science is that the universe had a beginning. Where did it come from? Historian of science Fred Burnham has written, "The God hypothesis is now a more persuasive and respectable hypothesis than at any time in the last 100 years. The second great scientific discovery is that space and time also had a beginning. This discovery demands an explanation. It calls for a transcendent cause beyond the universe itself. The third great discovery of modern science is that the laws and constants of the universe have been fine-tuned for human life to exist. As physicist Fred Hoyle has written, a common-sense interpretation of the evidence suggests a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry as well as biology to make life possible." The fourth great discovery of modern science is the digital code embedded in the DNA molecule in every human cell. The 3 billion characters of precise information in the digital code instruct the cell how to build complex molecules to do the work so the cell can stay alive. Where did this specified information come from? It is compelling evidence of an intelligent designer for the origin of human life. My guest today, who will explain these 4 great scientific discoveries, is Dr. Stephen Meyer, who received his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University. He is co-founder of the intelligent design movement in the world and a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. We invite you to join us for this special edition of the John Ankerberg Show. Welcome to our program. We're going to talk today about the question, do you believe that the scientific evidence from biology and cosmology actually points to an intelligent cause of the universe and of life itself? And if you've been with us for the last series of programs, we first of all took biology, and then we went into cosmology. And today, Steve is going to summarize both of those and put them together and then talk about which worldview, in the end, it's pointing to. So, Stephen, start us off.
Well, you bet. We've looked at evidence of design in biology. We've seen that there's evidence of design in physics built into the very fabric of the universe. We've looked at evidence for a definite beginning to the universe. And I've been fascinated with this for years. I first encountered this kind of new perspective on science at a conference in 1985. And so I've been thinking for years about which worldview makes best sense of the experience that we have of nature, of these big discoveries about the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the origin of life, and other evidences of design that I will want to talk about today. And so maybe a good place to start is just by talking about the competing worldviews. If you treat a worldview, first of all, is a coherent set of answers to some basic questions. Questions about, for example, ultimate reality. What's the thing from which everything else came? What's the entity from which everything else came? And as you look at the evidence from nature, there are a number of different worldviews that you might posit to try to explain what we see in the natural world. And we can summarize those briefly. Materialism is the idea that matter and energy are the entity from which everything else comes, and you can kind of represent that graphically if you look at, you represent the universe as a big circle, as I've done here with these kind of cartoons, and the pendulum there represents the laws of nature, the people and the planets and the trees and the mountains. That represents all the physical stuff in the universe. And the key tenet of the materialistic worldview is there's nothing beyond the physical world that exists. There's no God, there's no purpose or entity that could provide a purpose for the universe. The fundamental entity from which everything else comes is matter and energy. Now, there's a contrary worldview that is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, and that's theism. Theism holds that there is an orderly concourse of nature, thus there are laws of nature, again represented by the pendulum going back and forth, but that the universe is not autonomous and self-existent. That beyond the universe there's a God, and that God acted to bring the universe into existence. That's the middle arrow in the little diagram. That God underwrites the order of nature. That God sustains the universe in its orderly concourse. and in fact what we call the laws of nature are nothing more than a mode of God's action, a mode of divine action. And thirdly, there's an arrow that suggests that God periodically enters into the creation that he otherwise ordinarily sustains and upholds. So God acts as an agent within the created order from time to time as well. That's the theistic worldview. Now, there are two other worldviews that have been very dominant in the thinking of our civilization from time to time. One is the deistic worldview that holds that there is a God that's separate from the universe, but that God never acts within the cosmos. This was the clockwork maker idea of the 18th century, that God, in a sense, wound up the universe, designed it at the beginning, but then let it on its own and never had anything more to do with God. It was all a setup job from the beginning, and nothing was done beyond that. And then there's the great Eastern worldview called pantheism, and that worldview says that there is a God, but God is impersonal. God is not a mind or a personal agent, is not conscious, it's not someone to whom you can communicate through prayer or any other means. And instead, God is the mystical unity that binds all things together. All matter is in God, all God is in matter, and that's the pantheistic perspective. So we've got these four great systems of thought. What I've been curious about for years is which one best explains the evidence that we have in the natural world. You can treat a worldview also as a kind of metaphysical hypothesis, an explanatory system. So which one accounts best for these amazing discoveries that have been revealed by 20th century science? And so let's just quickly review those discoveries, the very things we've been talking about in the preceding programs. One is the discovery that the universe has a definite beginning. This was first discovered as a result of Hubble's observation that the universe is expanding in all directions. The galaxies are expanding, and if you wind the time clock backwards, you ultimately get to a beginning of the expansion and a beginning of the universe. That was something that Einstein came to realize, somewhat reluctantly, as we discussed. Another great discovery is the realization that not only is there a beginning to time, but there's a beginning to space itself. That as you go back far enough in time, the curvature of space becomes infinitely tight, corresponding to zero spatial volume, and thus you have a true singularity at the beginning in the words of the astronomers, and that also cries out for explanation. It seems to point to the need for some kind of cause beyond the universe itself, for the universe as a whole, because you can't put much matter in zero spatial volume, in fact, none at all. So a materialistic explanation would seem to be kind of off the table. So that's one of the great discoveries. The other thing that we talked about is the fine-tuning of the laws and constants of physics, and the fine-tuning of the configuration of matter at the very beginning of the universe. And what physicists have realized since the 1960s is that the universe is finely tuned to allow for the possibility of life, such that one famous physicist, Fred Hoyle, said that a common sense interpretation of physics, of the data, suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry and biology to make life possible, that the universe looks like a setup job. So that's a second huge discovery. So as I looked at the competing worldviews and asked which one of the four great worldviews could account for this evidence, I realized, through a process of deliberation, that both materialism, scientific materialism, and pantheism have a hard time accounting for both of these two classes of evidence because they don't posit the existence of anything beyond the universe, and still less anything intelligent beyond the universe. And yet the fine-tuning cries out for intelligence, and the cosmological singularity cries out for a cause beyond the universe, a transcendent cause. So when you take those two pieces of evidence together, it looks to me like only theism and deism provide an adequate explanation because they posit an entity beyond the universe itself which can act to bring the universe into existence.
Stephen, in adjudicating between theism and deism, what other evidence do you have? Let's go back to biology and summarize that for a moment, too.
Well, that's really where the key evidence lies, because we realize that the origin of life took place some time after the origin of the universe. We're talking about evidence, if we see evidence of design in biology, that evidence that would point to not a deistic creator which confined its activity to the very beginning of the universe and then had nothing to do with the universe ever thereafter. That would imply some kind of agent that is acting after the universe has come into existence, either a theistic designer or some kind of imminent designer, a space alien or something. I think we've already provided evidence that we
can't be a space alien.
This can't be a space alien because we've got evidence built into the fabric of the universe of design. That can't be explained. So if you want a hypothesis that explains all the classes of evidence, I think you need to invoke a theistic design hypothesis, but you can't see that until you realize that there's strong evidence of design in biology as well as physics and cosmology.
And what is it?
Well, that's what we talked about in the first series of programs that you brought me to here earlier, and that's the evidence of design that you find because of the information that's embedded in the DNA molecule. Francis Crick, 1957, he proposes what's called the sequence hypothesis. He proposes that along the spine of the DNA molecule, the four chemicals that are present there, the so-called bases, are functioning just like alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in the machine code. His hypothesis is eventually confirmed. Biologists today now realize that it's information that's running the show inside life. The digital code in the DNA molecule is essential to living functions, and to get life going in the first place, you've got to account for the origin of that information. Now, in my book, Signature in the Cell, I discuss this at great length. What I tried to do in the book was to show that there's a positive case for intelligent design based on this critical discovery. And I actually developed this case using the method of reasoning that Darwin himself used in his book, The Origin of Species. It's a scientific method for investigating events in the remote past. If you want to find out what caused something to happen a long time ago, you need to identify a cause which is capable of producing the event you're trying to explain. And the key thing we're trying to explain in The Origin of Life is the origin of the information that's necessary to make life possible. And Darwin's principle, which he got from his mentor Charles Lyell, was simply that you've got to find a cause which is capable of producing what you're trying to explain. Lyell put it this way. He said we should be looking for a cause that's now in operation. And when I saw that phrase in Lyell's, on the front piece of his book, I realized, wow, it's possible to make a scientific case for intelligent design, because what we know from experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning, is that information always arises from intelligence. In fact, one information scientist put it this way. He said, the creation of new information is habitually associated with conscious activity. Well, now, step back for just a minute. What do we have in the history of life but an infusion of new information that is necessary to get life going? And that, most scientists date that occurrence in the origin of the first life at about 3.85 billion years ago. Well, that's 10 billion years after the Big Bang. So if it's not a space alien who is the designer, it's clearly not a deistic creator either, because a deistic creator confines its activity to the beginning of the universe and no other time. So what we're looking at is evidence of design, which when coupled with the evidence that we've seen from physics of design that's built into the very fabric of the universe, is pointing in a decidedly theistic direction towards a designer who not only acted at the beginning of the universe, but who is also capable of acting after t equals 0, after the beginning of the universe, and within the history of the cosmos. Because that's what we see in biology, is evidence of design that arose in the history of the cosmos well after the beginning.